not actually a full-time comic book geek anymore. Turns out it takes up a lot of time. And this tech just is not going to play nice, so we'll see how this goes. Why are you here? No, really. I'm a lawyer, I don't do rhetorical questions. What are you doing here on a Sunday morning? Why do so many of us keep showing up here every Sunday morning, 9 or 10 months of the year, in this place, in this room, this sanctuary, this church? Me? I come here to worship because I am a person of faith, or at least I want to be. In the words of our vision statement, I challenge myself to be a person of faith. And I think you too, members of Michael Servetus Unitarian Society, are people of faith. You just may not think of yourselves that way. You are so ready to shy away from words or ideas like worship and religion and faith. I looked at our website yesterday, and the word faith does not show up in our vision statement, or our mission statement, or our statement of covenant. Well, it should. Because we are not a book club. We are not a university, not even a tiny, tiny university. We are not a political party. We are not a lecture society or the host of TED Talks or a study group. We are more than the butt of some moderately clever jokes by Garrison Keillor. We are a church. We are a faith, and for the love of God, we should embrace it.
There you go.
Ooh, says a voice in some of your heads. He said, God, like with a capital G. Yep. Wait, says the same inner voice. Does Chad even believe in God? Does it matter? No. Because whether there is a God or whether we believe in God has very little to do with the question of whether we are people of faith. Belief in God, whatever that might mean, is only one way to experience faith. It just happens to be the one we fixate on when we decide that faith shouldn't be part of our vision, our mission, or our covenant with each other. Or maybe we didn't decide faith shouldn't be put in those statements. Maybe it never even occurred to us to include it. It's even worse. Either way, I think it's the product of this false dichotomy that you use, especially those of us with a strong humanist tendency. This false dichotomy that we create between faith and reason. Now, it's not that we don't ever acknowledge faith. It's just that we aren't comfortable talking about it as something that we experience directly, as something we have. Faith is fine for some people. We just don't happen to need it ourselves. In crafting his theory of everything, American philosopher Ken Wilber addressed this divide between reason and faith. Now, he focused on the gap, or the perceived gap, between science and religion. Like us, many people who tend toward a belief or reliance on science are okay discussing religious ideas in the abstract, so long as nobody expects them to actually experience religion. He writes, "It is as if a group of scholars were discussing the beaches of Hawaii, and instead of going to Hawaii and looking for themselves, they simply pulled out a bunch of geography books and studied them. They studied the maps, not the territory itself, which always seemed rather odd to me. Surely there is room for both direct spiritual experience and more accurate maps and models of those experiences. I worry that as it's practiced today, UU tradition, and that our little church in particular, don't leave room for both faith and reason. Reason, by the way, is a word that does show up in our faith-free mission statement. And so I worry that we are too like the American Humanist Association, whose publication on humanism begins with a chapter entitled Humanism, the Alternative to Faith. No. No, 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 no. That cannot be how we approach, how we think about, how we talk about faith. If we want to grow as a congregation, as a tradition, as a church, as a faith, we need to stop naming faith as the thing we aren't. We need to make faith the center of Unitarian Universalism, and we need to stop defining ourselves and our tradition by what it isn't. We must craft a definition of faith that celebrates who and what we are, what we aspire to become, and how being a member of this faith enriches lives, our own and those of the people around us. So I set out to find a definition of faith. As it turns out, finding a good definition of faith is harder than it should be. Trying to find one brought to mind the words of Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, who said, "It's hard to define, but I know it when I see it." Now, he wasn't talking about faith, he was talking about pornography. Which, to be fair, is easier to see than faith. It's also easier to find on the internet. But my own web surfing did lead to some workable definitions of faith, not porn. One of my favorites is a definition from a UU World article by Doug Mutter. It's about a 10-year-old article. And his definition accepts the difficulty of defining faith. And he says that the best I can manage is to start with a situation, radical uncertainty, and peel away the more common reactions, panic and denial. Faith is what's left. No, he peels away panic and denial, but not the uncertainty. He embraces uncertainty, calls upon us to act in an uncertain world. Our actions, he writes, may succeed, they may fail, or they may be completely irrelevant when the hurricane comes. If you know that and act anyway, confidently and yet with total awareness that anything at all can happen, that is what I'm calling faith. UU theologian James Luther Adams offers up a definition of faith that even lets those of us who aren't comfortable with the word off the hook. We do not need to use the word faith to refer to it, he says. The word confidence will serve just as well. No one and no culture can long maintain a dynamic and creative attitude toward life without the confidence that human life has some important meaning, either actual or potential, and that this meaning may in some tolerable fashion be maintained or achieved. In other words, that resources are available for the fulfillment of meaning. This concern with the meaning of life and with the resources available for the fulfillment of this meaning is not merely optional luxury. It is a universal concern. It is the essential concern of religion. Now, I'm not entirely persuaded that confidence is an adequate stand-in for faith. On the other hand, James Luther Adams has thought about these things a lot more than I have, and he was a pretty smart guy. Still, I'm going to disagree with him because I'm a UU and a lawyer. My problem is confidence doesn't open up room for mystery and wonder and awe. As Krista Tippett writes in her book, Speaking of Faith, when we speak of faith, we are talking about something that is ineffable, trying to put words around something that will always ultimately defy them. We do our best, but we are left, in the end, with arms full, minds full of mystery. Mystery. If we could all accept that sometimes our minds and arms and hearts must be full of mystery, then I think Tippett is right, that we could disagree passionately with each other and also better remember the limits of our own knowledge. If mystery is real, even more real than what we can touch with our five senses, uncertainty and ambiguity are blessed. We have to live with that and struggle with its implications together. So I don't want Adam's use of the word confidence to rob us of that sense of mystery. What I do like about Adam's definition of faith is that it helps answer a related question. Why do we need to have faith anyway? This answer is easier for me, because it's not like there's any other choice. Whether we are aware of it or not, we all have faith of some kind. We couldn't function. We couldn't leave our houses. We couldn't make friends or fall in love without it. And my fellow rationalist UUs, science even backs me up on this. Nearly 20 years ago, neuroscientists discovered a region of the brain that lights up when people pray or meditate. When that region is triggered by whatever mechanism neuroscientists use to trigger a section of the brain, the patients reported what can best be described as a direct spiritual experience. Though how each person described it ultimately depended on their view of the ultimate, their faith, their religion. So, of course, journalists gave it a name, and they called it the God module. And of course, it sparked a debate. Is it proof that God exists, or is it proof that God and belief in God is literally just all in our heads? No. I think it's just some more proof that faith is part of what it means to be human. The question is whether we will recognize that faith, take it out, and look at it. Because as James Luther Adams liked to say, an unexamined faith is not worth having, for it can only be true by accident. Now that open examination of faith is the hallmark of UU tradition, or at least it should be. Ken Wilber believes faith should be like scientific inquiry, or it can be like scientific inquiry, with three general steps. Step 1, ask the question, conduct the experiment. Step 2, observe and experience the results, the data. Step 3, find other people to check your work. Deep religion or spirituality, says Wilber, follows this path. As he explains it, religious people rely on specific social practices, such as contemplation or prayer. They rest their claims on data and experiential evidence, and they can constantly refine and check these data in a community of the adequate. I'm not thrilled by that last bit. I'd like to think we as a congregation are a little better than merely a community of the adequate, but you get the point. Reason and faith do not need to conflict. They do not need to exist in separate spheres. I just noticed that when I wrote this last night, I didn't write exist in separate spheres. I wrote exist in separate fears. There may be a whole new sermon in that. Reason and faith should be and can be intertwined. So I'm not against reason. I'm just afraid that we are too much in the habit of letting reason push faith aside. And when we do that, we deny ourselves what Reverend Kendall Gibbons calls the language of reverence. She wrote in an article in 2006 the frustration that she felt as a UU child seeking meaning. I discovered my spirituality in much the same way that my peers raised in more conservative faiths discovered their sexuality. Accidentally, furtively, without guidance, moved by overwhelming inner tides, and with some sense of shame. I longed for the white First Communion dresses and the menorah candles of my neighbors. I yearned for someone, anyone, to take my childish capacity for devotion seriously. But seeds planted in paper cups on the Sunday school windowsill, the dead bird discovered in the backyard, the calligraphic hymns in We Sing of Life, and the annual flower communion were the scant resources my liberal religious education offered. To my parents and teachers, almost all of whom had grown up in other religious traditions, the absence of texts, rote prayers, sacraments, holy objects, and moralistic picture books represented freedom. But without any language for my emerging sense of mystery and wonder, I came to feel the contrary, deprived of the tools with which to understand or express those experiences. I have an example of this from my family. Just this week, my sister had to put her beloved dog Bailey down. My sister has 3 kids, the oldest of whom is 8. My sister is the one child of 3 from our family who did not leave the Catholic faith, and she is raising her children in the Catholic faith, and so they have those tools. And so they sat together as a family with Bailey, and they took this box that they were in the barrier in, and they wrote on it. And the children wrote to God and said, "Dear God, please love Bailey." They had the tools to experience that sense of loss and wonder and life and love. And I worry that maybe we don't all the time. But the thing is, as a faith, we have so much to offer people who are seeking meaning, who want to feed their sense of mystery and wonder, who want to kindle that sense in their children. But to do that, we must embrace the idea and the language of faith. We have to speak our faith. So here's mine. This isn't in the script. I struggled with this part. I still don't think I had it right. That's not the point. Finding the words for this, it's like Krista Tippett said, it's ineffable. Words aren't enough, but words are what we have. So for me, faith is not the things you believe. It is deeper than that. Faith is the foundation you build beliefs on. It is the earth that sustains and feeds your beliefs as you grow and prune them. And when those beliefs crumble under the weight of contrary experience and evidence, when they wither because the world changes around you, then faith is where you go to build up new beliefs. When you look around the mess and say, well, back to the drawing board, the drawing board is faith. For me, it's the web of yarn that we made here this morning. It is, in the words of Marcus Aurelius, the conviction that everything is interwoven and the web is holy. This has been my faith for decades. Before I was conscious of it, before I was a Unitarian Universalist, before I even knew there was such a thing as a UUT in the first place. The first time I realized that it was my faith, that I even had a faith to begin with, was when I went to a UU church for a concert, picked up a pamphlet, read the principles, and I got to the 7th principle. The interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. And it was, for me, a revelation.